he was involved in a street gang in New York City. And I mean, because when he was involved in the gang, there was the Crips and the Bloods. One group wore red and one group wore blue, and they were always fighting with each other. And eventually, he became, you know, very became religious, and he like brokered deals so that the Bloods and the Crips could get together and try and work out their differences and not be feuding and fighting and killing each other all the time. And then there was Gerald Traycraft. He was the pastor of the Kilbuck Church of Christ in Kilbuck, Ohio. And Mr. Hugh Snapp, he was the dean of this week. Hugh Snapp and his daughter Diane Snapp, they were from Columbus, Ohio. Tom Van Horn, which lives in Loudonville, Ohio, south of here, where that Mohegan youth camp was. Tom Van Horn, and he actually took me in when I got released from Mohegan. No, it was before I got released from Mohegan. He he took me in, and I lived. Him and his wife, they had a log cabin way out, down in Loudonville where he lived at and stuff. And he he took me in for a while, and they had it was like a loft. You had to walk up these steps in this log cabin. There was a loft area, and that's where my bed and stuff was. It was up there in the loft. And matter of fact, when when I moved to Wooster, I lived with him for a while, but then when I moved to Worcester, he found me a place to live, and he paid my rent for the first 6 months until I could find a job and started making my own money. So that's how good of a friend he was. He put me up for the first 6 months until I could get on my, on my own feet and stuff. And there was a Phil Worrell. He worked at he went to he worked at Milligan College in Milligan, Tennessee. It was a you know you know like that CBS Cincinnati Bible Seminary, but this was in Tennessee, and it was called Milligan College, and it was a church college down there that he went to, and there was a Skip Hartman. He lived in Caledonia, Ohio, and it was just somebody that I met, at camp that week. There was a John Smucker. Um, he lived in Downton, Ohio at the time. Vonda Westner, the guy that owned it, the campgrounds was Ellis Westner, and Vonda Westner was his wife. So, I mean, they're both passed away now, and they're buried out in somewhere out in Indiana. And but I knew Vonda and Ellis Westner real well because I was there at camp many times, and I still go there. I still go there to visit. I mean, well, mainly what I go there for now is I go fishing there, and I don't have to have a fishing license because it's private property. So I just let them know in the office that I would like to go fishing. And they said, okay. And because the church that I belong to here in Worcester, which I haven't been to in a while because it's, on Sunday mornings, I'm working. So, and by the time I get off of work at noon or whatever, church is over with. So I haven't been in a while. and but this this uh, this Bonda, Ellis and Bonda Westner, you know, they were the owners of the Round Lake at that time. I mean, it's had different owners since then, but because they retired, and then and then later on, is when they passed away and stuff. But and then I was telling you about that Tom Van Horn that I lived with down there, in Loudonville, and stuff. I have his I have his name and address right here, Tom Van Horn, uh, Royal Route 1 in Loudonville, Ohio. I have him on here. So, and yeah, I don't know what else. Well, that other picture I was thinking of was, I must have seen it online that had that Dan Lowry and that Carol Morse Miller, in the picture. It wasn't a week that I worked, but it was a week that they were campers. I wasn't a camper that week, and I wasn't working in the kitchen that week, but they were campers, from the children's home. And so I saw the picture and stuff, on the Round Lake website and stuff. And like, here's another award that I got from that Lewis Monfield uh, junior high school where I completed the ninth grade. Here's another one that is from there. It says Certificate of Achievement, Robert Honorable Mention 2.0, which is not that great because 4.0 is perfect. So 2.0 is like a B average, and it says Certificate of Achievement, Honorable Mention 2.0 awarded to Robert Marshall for Scholastic Achievement. The Lewis J. Bromfield Junior High School awarded this 21st day of July 1971. So it's a little certificate that I got from the high school, just like this is the certificate of when I completed the ninth grade at that, that's when I was locked up. And so this, stuff that I got. I love you, sweetheart. Huh? Well, that certificate of achievement, it was for, it was, well, actually, let me make sure that says 2.0. It says 2 point, um, actually it's 2.8. So it's just below a C average because 4.0 is perfect A's. A 4.0 is, you know, nothing but straight A's and everything. So, and if it's a 3.0, that's a B average. That's a straight B. And if it's 2.0, that's a C average. So my honorable mention was a 2.8. So I was just below a B average. So I was like a C plus. That was what my average was for this, what my grades and stuff while I was in school there. So, so it's just below a B average. 2.8 because 3.0 is a B average. So, yeah, but that was years ago. I didn't do that well in high school. I mean, well, the ninth grade, because see, when I went to the children's home, that's when I was, in that, you know, Mohegan Youth Camp. But when I went to the children's home, that's when I left Mohegan Youth Camp and was, put into the children's home, here in Wooster. And that's when because I started in the 10th grade, because I went there in August of 71, and in September of 71 is when the school year started, and that's when I was in the 10th grade then. So while I was at the children's home, I was in, well, I took the 10th, 11th, and 12th, but I had to take the 10th grade twice. My first time I flunked it. Only because I was a half a credit short. Because I was in speech during the 10th grade, and during the course of it was a half of a year, half of a year. It wasn't like you had to take speech for the whole year. It was just for half of the school year. And you got up, in front of the class. All the students had to get up and give a 2 or 3 minute, maybe a 5 minute speech. Well, your final speech had to be a 15-minute speech, and you couldn't be using a lot of yes, ands, ifs, buts, ors. You had to give a speech, and you could use your little cliff notes. You could write on cards, like different highlights, but you couldn't be reading everything off of the cards. You had to, you just had to give the speech, but you could look at the cards for like certain highlights or something. And I didn't do my 15-minute speech. So because of that, I missed going from 10th grade to 11th grade by a half of a credit. So, because here, to go from one grade to the next, you had to have so many credit hours in. And I'm not sure what it was to go from ninth to 10th and 10th to 11th and all that. But all I know is that in the 10th grade, I missed going to the 11th grade by a half of a credit because of that speech, of the speech class. Because it was only a half of a year's class, and so that it was worth a half of a credit because it was only a half of a year. And so because of not doing that final 15-minute speech, I flunked speech, and that's what, that half a credit is what made me have to take the 10th grade over again. So, so I had to take the 10th grade. So actually, when I graduated, see, most people graduate when they're, around 18 or so. Well, I didn't actually graduate until I was 19 because I had to take the 10th grade over. And that put me a year behind. So I'm just a bad boy. And if I would have did my 15-minute speech, I would have graduated and moved on to the 11th grade. But I didn't. So I'm the one that messed that up. I messed it up for myself where I had to take the 10th grade over again. That was all my fault. So, but, everybody makes mistakes. So, that was one of mine. I mean, I had other mistakes because, you know about all that. So, but that's the past, I did it once. That was it. Yep, and I'll never do anything like that again. So, yep, I, I did a boo boo. And actually, when that happened, I was living here in Wooster when all that went down and that happened and everything. When I got sent away and stuff, that's when I was living here in Worcester. Yep. but you know, it's just like, you know, like I told you in the past, you know, I was sitting I was sitting in jail waiting to go to court when my dad passed away in 19 May of 1980, and they let me out to go to the funeral and everything. You know, got picked up at 6 o'clock in the morning and taken out to where my car was, and went to the viewing and the funeral and everything, and turned myself back in at 10 o'clock at night. So they weren't worried about me, you know, figured, you know, because some people would, you know, oh yeah, they're gonna let me out. Well, I'm not gonna turn myself back in. I'm gonna take off. I ain't gonna do that. You know, I figured, hey, I'm the one that made the mistake. I gotta pay the price. I need to get up and turn my air off. It's getting downright cold in here. Let's see what it's at 72 degrees right now because I have my air on, but then I have my fan sitting on my floor blowing on me, and my feet are downright cold right now because I don't have them covered up, and my feet, they feel like icicles right now. But it's comfortable considering how that it's like 90 degrees outside. So this is comfortable right now. But I'm gonna still turn the air off for a little while.